Pastor Ken, water walking. You told us a little bit about that experience over there in Hawaii. Maybe unpack that a little bit for us. Like, how has this been working in your own life and what you see for Cathedral of Faith right now?
Well, at that time, Vaughn, I was on vacation with my wife and the grandkids and my daughter and Daniel, and we were blessed with being able to go over to Hawaii. And I would get up early because, as I mentioned, when you got grandkids, if you're going to exercise, you better get up early because after they're up, you're going all day with them. And it was a blast. So I'd try to get up early and I would run. I'm not a runner, right? So you guys know me well enough to know that.
You're in safe company right now.
That's right. But it's Hawaii, and you put your earbuds in, and it takes some of the pain away. So I'd run, and I'd listen to different things on different days when I would run. This one day, I had on I think it was iHeart Worship, and the path I was running was just along these buildings, and then you hit the beach, kind of the water's right there. And so I was running and listening to different worship songs that were coming up. And I came around the corner, and right when I got to the area where the water started, the ocean song came on. And in that moment, I know you guys had this kind of thing happen. I mean, it doesn't happen that often to me, but there was a definite shift in my spirit. Whereas before I was just kind of running and you're listening, but man, all of a sudden it's like your antenna are up. And I was really locked in. And so I'm running, it gets to the place in the song where Spirit lead me, and I look up at the palm trees, and they're, the wind's blowing it out toward the ocean, right? You can't see the wind, but you can see the effects of the wind. It's going out toward the ocean. And in that moment, and it goes on to, into the waters, where my faith will be much stronger, take me deeper. And in that moment, I look out onto the water. And again, I'm not a great mystic, and it's hard for me to even describe really what I sensed in that moment. So I looked out on the water. I didn't see anything physically per se, but spiritually, it was as if Jesus was right there. I mean, right there on the waves, and I immediately, the passage comes to mind, well, Lord, if it's you, bid me to come. And Jesus said, I could hear it in my spirit just as clear as we're talking. And he said, come. And in that moment, I broke down. It was one of those things where you just overcome with presence. And I ran and I cried all the way back to the hotel room. Even talking about it right now is just, it's a little, it brings me back to that moment. And I've got to say, I didn't know exactly what it meant at that point. I just knew that I wanted to position my heart every day where that became my prayer. Lord, if it's you, bid me to come. Kind of for the next season of my life, whatever that meant. I didn't know. And the very next day, it just happened, right? So, the very next day, I get this contact out of nowhere. I had no previous contact with this group. And they reach out and invite me to go and be a speaker at this global leadership pastors conference. And even more than I think me speaking at the conference, it was Jesus already answering that prayer. Wow. Lord, if it's you, bid me to come. Come. And so it was getting out of the boat and onto the water. And I could give you, moment after moment. Then it was Daystar Television. Then it was invitation to the Unity prayer gathering here in the city, or now it's Italian television, and it just seems like one thing after another. But I really felt it wasn't just for me. I felt it was, was stirring something up in me, and I didn't want to project it onto other people, but I really felt there was something for our church family, that God was calling our church family. Now, whether it was Cathedral Church to the Cathedral Village, whether that was the getting out of the boat thing. Anyway, that was my experience, and I felt like I needed to share that word with our church family.
Did you feel like you needed to do it immediately? I mean, was it just in you to just say, like, I mean, because oftentimes it's something that maybe you want to embrace, but it just seems, this experience, it just seems like you just wanted to blast it. It was just in your heart and your spirit. Like kind of Jeremiah, it's, shut up in my bones, I got to get it out of me,
It was. Adam, it was shut up in my bones. I felt like I needed to walk with it and sit with it for a while, because I feel like sometimes it's like that passage. It would have been easy to do one sermon on it and then you're done with it. But sometimes I think we skim over what we need to sit with for a while and just soak in it.
Yeah. It's less of a word and more of a season.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes there is a word for that moment, but sometimes it's about a season. And, this year we've been looking at what it looks like to do courageous things. Last year was all about being courageous, and God prepared us with that powerful series you did about being courageous. And we needed that in that COVID time. But this year it just sort of shifted to, be courageous, but now do courageous, not just have courage for what's coming, but have courage for where you're coming to.
That's good.
Yeah.
Radical courage. I mean, you know what I mean? Because the whole concept of walking on water, you know what I mean? That's pretty, I love the look, because it's really, kind of like looking at Peter, the context of, you got to just get out the boat,
Yeah, right.
And so, I mean, I love that.
You mentioned the COVID season, which is, has been our reality, everyone's reality really for the last year and a half or so. It certainly has changed the church world, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things you think that has been? We already know it's been difficult, right? The gatherings have been kind of, we had to go through a season of just gathering online and stuff. But what do you think? God's always in all the stuff, right? Like, so we've gained some things in this season too. So like, what are some things that you guys see that we've gained?
I know, like what Pastor Wayne was saying in regards to just, doing courageous. And I think that is not necessarily just something for the folks in the church, but also for the leaders in the church, because they have to now do courageous church radically different than they have. And it, prior to the pandemic, I mean, if you think about it, the church, it's always, we just know people are going to come, right? In essence. Now, post-pandemic, people have had almost a year and a half to be rewired. And I'm talking Christians and non-Christians. And so in that year and a half, I just think now, in the context of how people are looking at church, I think one of the things that, doing courageous is that we have to look and see the new church with that question, because I could be super wrong, but I don't think the church people are not going to flock back to the church. That's my simple opinion, because of this pandemic, because people have been rewired, and I just think folks we want them at the church. I mean, we want you in the seats. Yeah. We miss you in the seats. But doing courageous is, what if they don't come back? And I guess that is the question, the rhetorical question for the moment.
Well, I think two things show up in this. One is, whenever there's shaking, God always says clearly in Scripture, I shake what can be shaken so that what's unshakable remains. So we've had some shaking going on, so we can sort of see. The other thing that happens is, if I had a bowl over my head filled with a liquid you would have didn't know what it is until you bump me and it spills out. I think what's happened is it's sort of revealed where some people are, and that gives us the chance to step up and have church be church and have the presence of God be something people yearn for. And I think what it does is it shows us what's really inside and what we need to continue to grow in, because the gathering of the people of God is significant. I mean, Scripture is pretty clear. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves. And as much as I love being online and interacting with everybody during services, there's nothing like being in the presence of God with his people, experiencing what he can do in that moment. That's what's been so beautiful the last couple of weeks of being back together is, you know, there's something that happens, that increase when we all lift our voices in God's presence and he fills that. And I think it's shown us that that's really valuable and that we have to continue to, I mean, we'll continue online because that's important. Now we have people all over the world watching that couldn't watch otherwise.
Awesome.
Which has really expanded our influence.
Right.
And we've been in millions of homes now we wouldn't have been in. But that's to sort of call people back to this place. Maybe it's not church the way it used to be, but the church God wants us to, as we step in faith to the next season, as we come out of the next waters of 2021 and 2022, that as we step out, God's going to do something in us to just increase his power and presence when we worship. I mean, the beautiful thing about Peter in this story is Jesus was with him. That's what made it possible. And Jesus is with us. He's with his church. He's manifesting himself. He can't wait to reveal himself in services. And so I think getting people to see the importance of coming together. I mean, like, that's what's happening for me every Sunday. I can't stop weeping in the middle of worship because it's just so beautiful to experience God's presence in that way. And being back together is part of that. And I think it helps us see that's a priority and we need to do that. And as wonderful as online is, it's not a substitute. It's just sort of an invitation. It's an appetizer for what happens when we all come together in this presence.
See, I look at it different in the context of, in the book of Daniel, it suggests that in the last days, we're going to see technology advance. And what we've seen in the last 50, 60 years of technology, it's radically has expedited where we can't even think. I mean, if you think about it, a phone now is more powerful than a local bank branch. I mean, you can buy a home, you can buy a car. So I think with that mindset, I mean, I totally get what you're saying in regards to, yes, you know, you're speaking to the church, but our job as well is to, I mean, I get we're to equip the church, but those who are dying without Christ, how do we connect? How do we connect with them? And so I guess that, I mean, we know the importance of a local church. I mean, I don't think I can live without the local church, but that's me. I've been a Christian for, 35, 38 years. I get that. Yeah. But I think nowadays, folks, this technology, I remember years ago, my wife's parents were pastors, and I remember when, I've been married 30 years, and speaking to her parents about thinking about getting a computer. And I remember her parents said, "Oh no, we won't have a computer in our church. That's, and they're old school. They're like, oh no, that's like inviting, I love my in-laws, but that's inviting, the adversary, the enemy into our church." And I would look at them and say, you can do a lot of budgeting. You can do a lot of things with this thing called a computer.
Was it an Apple or a PC?
Because that'll make a difference. That's right.
So all that to say is that I wasn't there to tell them to get a computer and I get a computer. I'm just saying, I just looked at them and thought, that's an interesting paradigm to have. Mm-hmm. And so now 2021, I think now you're seeing folks with this kind of, we have this opportunity now to say, okay, do we, and how do we utilize? I mean, I know the church has been, the church, thank God, the Cathedral, we've done great things to reach out to the folks. And I was telling Pastor Ken, even on his Easter message, I thought that was a brilliant message when he was outside the pulpit and went all over the Bay Area. His message was phenomenal. And I just thought, in some ways, I thank God that we have a pastor here who's not afraid to take a chance like that away from the pulpit. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope people flock back in. I really do. But with that little thought is, what if they don't? So how do we, I mean, you're the I mean, what do you think about this?
Yeah, well, I think the challenges that the pandemic presented to the local church were real. One of the things I learned through the whole process, I think God built more flexibility into me. I tend to like structure. I work best in structure. But what I learned is that flexibility during the pandemic really was a key to being able to see not, okay, here's what we can't do, but what can we do? So that's how, and I think that flexibility then opened you up to God saying, okay, out of the boat and into the water, like we did with the television. But I think to me, it's more of a both and, because I think the church in every generation wants to try to maximize the tools that God brings to it, which is technology. But I think there's nothing that can substitute the celebration of the local church within a community. So I think it's figuring out, as we've used technology digitally through this time, we still maintain, we've got 2,000 years of church history. The church has been through pandemics before.
Yeah.
It has survived. Jesus said, I will build my church. It's the one thing Jesus said he would build, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So I think the church will continue to thrive. Is what will the new baseline be? Only God knows. But I believe that, like Wayne said, what can be shaken will be shaken. But the church, not just this local church, Cathedral, but the church in the Bay Area, it will survive. But I think we have to, and it will thrive. It won't just survive, it'll thrive.
That's right.
But I think then we got to figure out is, let's not now throw away technology. Let's not do away with the digital world. But let's see how the digital world can continue to advance the gospel, and advance the mission, and how the local church can maximize those tools like you've talked about, Adam, because I think it can. But I think it's not either or.
Right,
I think you can't
absolutely.
replace the real, there's nothing like Wayne said, there's something about being together that just, it's different than being on Zoom. Even on Zoom, where there's interactive,
Yeah.
man, there's nothing like us four sitting here
Absolutely.
That's right.
in the same space.
Yeah.
And when you go to church, the other good thing, I think C.S. Lewis pointed out, one of the great things, because, I had this dialogue with a podcaster here recently. And we were talking about the need for the local church. Does he need the local church, kind of? He's got his buddies who he's in a text thing with, and they've got transparency, they've got accountability. Does he need the local church? And so we were kind of discussing this around a fire, and it was a fiery discussion. So we were going back and forth. And so the thing I pointed out to him, I said, the thing that happens in a local church, I mean, obviously, it was Cathedral's credibility over 55 years that positioned us with the city, that enables us to serve. You can't do that with five guys over the text, right? The other thing, though, one of the other things I said, and I think I got this from C.S. Lewis, and he's much smarter than I am, so I love quoting him. But he talked about how in a local church, he said, the good thing about that is I'm with a group of people I didn't choose.
Yeah, that's big.
When you go to when you're hanging out with your buddies and your friends, it's with people that you chose.
Right.
When I go to church, I'm with a group of people that I didn't choose, and that's healthy for me. God chose them. Yeah. And it teaches me to love people that are different than me and people that I don't have everything in common with, And so I think there's just a lot of things that happen in the setting that it's also the church's chance to highlight the value of being a part of a local community. Yeah. That's why even at the end of the TV show, I was always saying, find a good local church near you. Because now's not the time to step away from the church. Now's the time to get plugged into the local church. And so I think it's figuring out, to me, how do you use technology to advance that?
Well, one of the things I appreciate about you, Pastor Ken, during this pandemic time is what you just said, is that instead of complaining about the government and blame shifting and pointing fingers at this and that and something else, your whole approach to leadership was, what can we do instead of what can't we do? And I think that's important for all of us when it's time to step out of it. What can I do versus what can't I do? I think what we're talking about here is very similar to what happened in Paul and Peter's day. They were in Jerusalem, but they left Jerusalem and they went to Rome. And the reason is all roads led to Rome. That was the center of life. That was the center of everything. And they knew the best way to get the gospel to the most amount of people was to go to Rome, because that was the center. Now, the goal wasn't just the roads leading to Rome. The goal was getting people into fellowship, so that they wrote 1 Peter and Ephesians and Galatians. It was all about fellowship. And I think sort of all roads leading to Rome is sort of like all roads lead to the internet now. And I think what happened is, even though we've been working with the internet for years, having online, many, many churches had never done that before. And it opened up the whole church to say, this is an important influence. We need to use this. But the goal isn't just the internet, just like the goal wasn't the roads to Rome. The goal was, hey, all roads lead to Rome, so we can get the gospel out, so they can come together in fellowship and relationship. Because in the end, discipleship isn't just truth to be known or experiences to be had. It's in relationship with God and with each other. And I think calling people to that hunger for that relationship is going to be really vital. I mean, sure, I can watch podcasts or listen to them, and I can watch TV shows and sermons, and it's all truth, but it's got to be lived out in relationship.
Yeah, you know, Wayne, it reminds me, like when my dad first was on TV, my dad always believed in the power of media. I mean, first week he's here in the city, he gets on TV.
Yeah.
You know, there's 4 stations. You know, now there's 300, 400 million. Now there's 4 stations. He gets on TV because he believed in the power of the media to reach people, to take the gospel, to use that tool. That was the computer of its day, right? I mean, that was the new technology. But he always, as a pastor, he always knew that the television was a supplement, not a substitute. Yeah. And I would hear him share that all the time, that it was a supplement, not a substitute to being plugged into a local church.
That's so good.
And so he would always, and I think because he was coming from a pastor's background, I mean, he was a pastor, but he also believed in the power of media. And maybe that's what he modeled to me. So it's like, as we move into what's the new technology today, right? It's like, these things become a supplement to everything we're doing, but not really a substitute. That's good. For the experience of the local church.
But I think what we're talking about is really capturing this story of stepping out of the boat. Because one of the things that keep you from stepping out of the boat is Peter had been on the water all of his life. I mean, his whole career was on the water in a boat. And in that moment, he's stepping out of what he was used to, stepping out of what he was comfortable with, stepping into something that he'd never done before. Yeah. And I think the church can get stuck. There was a great book that came out years ago called The 7 Last Words of the Church. Just like we have the seven last sayings of Christ on the cross, the 7 last words of the church
Should
are this.
I do an Easter series on that?
No. So here's the 7 last words of the church. We've never done it that way before.
Oh, that's good.
And so what happens is people get used to a form. Now, the reality is there are 2 kinds of attributes. God has attributes that belong to him only. Only he has all power. Only he knows all things. Only he is immutable, which means he never changes. Then there's other attributes that we can have. Love, joy, peace. Those are part of who he is we can have. But we tend to want to be immutable. We tend to want to get everything just right. You know, I remember my mother would say, the house is clean, don't mess anything up. It's perfect right now. And it's like, we want to get our whole life together, but God's whole process is, don't get comfortable in that boat. Yeah. You know, just because you did church this way, just because you led your life this way, just because your career was that way, don't let that boat limit you from stepping out. I was looking the other day, the word, when he said come, that word come shows up over 600 times in the New Testament. And I think that really captures, you know, the 2 great actions of Jesus, or calls of Jesus to action is, hey, come follow me. You know, come to me. You know, come to me, all you laboring and heavy laden. Come out on the water. And I think what it is it's exiting what we're comfortable with, exiting where we're used to, and taking the risk to try something new. And that's where we are as a church right now.
Yeah.
We don't want to do innovative just to do innovative. We don't want to be risky just to be risky, but we want to hear what God's calling us to.
Yeah.
And I think I just don't want to say, oh, this is about jumping out of planes or going parasailing.
Right,
Those may
right.
be great, and they might be great risk, but what does it look like to really say, God, I just don't want to be comfortable with where I am. I want to come closer to you. Because when I come, I'm closer to him. I'm closer to being with him and hearing from him. And I just think there's a longing in all of us for that.
What I see is the gift of uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's a gift.
That's a great word.
Yeah.
It's a gift to us. And that's because that highlights the need to hear what the master's saying.
And keep our eyes on him.
Absolutely. Like the fundamental of our faith, right? And I think that's what I appreciate about how you've led us through this, Pastor Ken. Being, you obviously had your antenna up to get the word to be courageous before the pandemic even hit. That I don't know about you, but that really gave me a lot of comfort. Like, okay, we're not alone here. God's with us.
Yeah.
And he's speaking. And that's one of the things, like with this water walking series, fast forward to now, on the hind ends of the pandemic maybe or something, but like, I think the gift of uncertainty has us question everything. Like it's a supplement. It's not a substitute for Christ himself, and,
Yeah.
And how, like, I highlighted my need to really lean into the Father, and it's like, what do I need to do in this season? Because in some respects, man, the gift of uncertainty is a beautiful thing. Like it's an artist playground, right? It's chaos is what artists use to make things. That's God spoke into the chaos, right? And I think that I was highly productive during the season. Like, we released 3 singles, we released a full album, we made, launched podcasts, and I think it awakened my soul to be like, okay, you take away the gathering, as in, the pandemic take away the gathering.
Which is radical, Vaughn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so but this can't be all that God can use. Like, what else?
Right.
What else can
Absolutely,
What
yeah.
else can He speak into and bring life to? So I thought that was a gift to us in a certain respect. And just to tie it back again to the series about how stepping, the gift of uncertainty is we don't know what tomorrow holds, but we can't stay here, like. One of the perspectives that you have, people that act like there never was a pandemic, and then you act like people that the pandemic's never going to leave, and then you have some people in the middle. We can't just sit there and hide, and be until everything is certain, right? Until everything is safe, until everyone is vaccinated, or till what. We can't live like that. Like, it's a fear-based kind of way of living. I mean, of course you have wisdom and things like that, but like, how can we move forward? And so, like, this kind of series with water walking, like, it's stirring in me to know that to follow God is to move forward, is forward motion. I just had celebrated my son's 8th birthday. And
Zion's 8 years old.
Yeah.
Gee, money.
And I tell you, like, I was highly emotional, this one. Like, I woke up weeping, like, and I felt like something's leaving me. And to bring this back to the church life, it was like, I'm never going to get this 8th birthday again. And I think for us as a church, we're never going to get 2020 back again. We're never going to get 1995 back, whatever that was. And I think in our faith, we're never going to get yesterday back. But we need to step into tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's
good.
what I'm hearing from you, Pastor Ken, and hearing from the Spirit of God for all of us is that, we're going to lose some things. It's just that's the nature of being in time. But God is calling us forward.
As you're speaking, Vaughn, I was just thinking that you're right. I mean, being part of a church is so key, so foundational. It's so needed. It's so important. For 12 years, I had the chance to, the pastor of the Oakland Raiders, and I remember we would have, this one gentleman, he would come, one player, and he would say, man, I can't miss chapel because I need to reset my iOS,
Yeah.
And operating system, it's kind of a computer lingo stuff, but he was serious.
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
and that's what I think. I hope people, however they come to through the doors, is that it's such a beautiful thing to walk into a place, and I love what you said, Pastor Ken, in regards to work with people of all different ethnicities, economical levels. I mean, we're all radically different. You walk into a place, and Cathedral is a place of love. You walk in this, like, you can almost feel it in the air, this love, and you walk in, and I'm just thinking, coming in for the first time, and you what is this, And this is a true story. I have my grandmother, my dad's mom, came to Cathedral of Faith. She spoke no English. She was 90 years old.
Wow.
Total Catholic, right? Never been to a Christian church, but my uncle brought her to Cathedral. And this is with your pops. And she just started crying. She goes, that man, Jesus is all over him. You see what I'm saying? And so I'm saying this is because this is why I think, Pastor, when you're talking about the church, right? I mean, this is when people walk in, nothing that society or culture, sports, whatever it is, man, you walk into a place like this called church, it's indescribable of what happens to the midst or to the depths of our soul. And you can only experience that. You get taste on podcasts, you get taste on online, you get taste of it, right? But when you walk into a place where people are unified and with one person in mind, Jesus, it's radical. And you can only experience that in a place where other believers who are all messed up, including myself, broken.
I need to reset my iOS every week, man.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Pastor Ken, as people come in, and it's pretty awesome when you think about it.
It is.
Well, the whole discourse of the writer of Hebrews, he gives the whole faith chapter of all these people who had faith. And then the whole purpose of it is, hey, run with perseverance because you have this cloud of witnesses. Now, I used to think that meant, we have this great cloud of people watching us, so we better do well. But the reality in that text, what it's saying is we look for faith by recognizing other people's faith around us. So when I come to church, I have people believing for salvation for their family, people believing for healing, people who've experienced healing, and we become a cloud of witnesses to each other to help us have faith to step out into that new place. Because honestly, it's easier to stay still. I mean, Peter expressed this earlier when he was with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. They're having this great glory moment. He's like, let's just build a tabernacle and stay here forever. And it's like we all want to just sort of stay in this moment because it's safe. But the reality is following Jesus means stepping out. And, if I didn't step out, I wouldn't make the transitions. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't evolve.
You wouldn't evolve. And there was something that Ruthie said, we're not just supposed to go through life. We're supposed to grow through life. And I think that's how we grow. I have this formula that I give leaders all the time that says growth means you have to change. Change means you have to have loss. Loss means you're going to have pain. So in other words, to grow, you have to have pain. And that pain is really stepping out of where I am into something new and recognizing it's not easy. And all I have to know is the next step. Right. I don't have to know all of them.
Yeah.
I just have to know this is what God said. I take that one step. He said, come. So I was like, okay, I'll do that one thing. Because I tend to want to see everything down the road. Okay, what's the implications? Where this going?
Right.
Let me analyze all this.
I want the details,
and
man.
I want the whole strategy. And God's like, no, just step. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And
You got to move forward is to leave behind.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right? You can't. It's paradox. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you said about, I think, again, looking back at the, crisis is it's the catalyst that moves us out of the boat
The
and into the
storm.
water. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And but whatever it takes to move us out onto the water, it's taking that step of faith into Jesus or Peter asked Jesus. I read this in a commentary that Peter didn't ask Jesus for a guarantee. He just asked him for a command.
Well, that's
He didn't say, Jesus, promise I won't sink.
Yeah.
He just said, Jesus, command me to come. And so the whole thing of uncertainty, I mean, I think the new logo for our church should be a question mark, right? Because who knows, right?
That's right.
What the future holds, but the deal is, I mean, isn't that the nature of life?
Absolutely.
If you
100%.
want, if
100%.
you were born into the wrong species, really.
Absolutely.
Because life involves risk. You can't
That's right.
live without risking, really.
Absolutely.
Everything is risky.
Absolutely. And everything's dangerous and everything's filled with pain.
It is, yeah. And so I think, again, we try to sometimes arrange our lives in such a way where we minimize that.
Yeah.
But if you minimize it too much, then you stop living.
Right.
And
Progressing.
stop progressing, you stop growing. And I don't want to ever stop growing.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes, again,
at least spiritually.
Spiritually, that's right, yeah. Yeah, I grew enough weight-wise during the pandemic. I don't need to grow that any more of that.
That's really good, Pastor Ken. Because the growing and evolving of the church, and I think about it in terms of a father again. He can't be 8 forever. And to move forward, there's loss and there's gain and there's pain. And I saw somewhere a few weeks ago about life is hard, but choose your hard. It's hard to be in shape, but it's also hard to be out of shape.
Right.
It's just different pains, right?
Yeah.
It's finding the right clothes or dealing with health problems down the line, and it's hard to walk this thing out with Christ. But it's a different type of hard to abandon it and to live it however you choose to live it. And I think too, like we mentioned your father and how he passed this down to you, right? You grew up in the faith and it was handed off from one generation to another. And I look at this, how it's like how you were saying, like we have to move forward. Because we have to move forward. I have to move forward because it's not just about me. It's about my son picking this thing up someday, and it's about our children and the next generation. And I think one of the things that it strikes me is with technology and how we're exposed to so much more now. We highlight we experience great things, but we also highlight our dysfunctions. We're a highly egotistical culture right now. It's about us. Most of our pictures are selfies. We're focused on our world, our experience.
Wait a second.
Actually, today's National Selfie Day.
Here we go, Vaughn. All right.
But I think too, I was thinking about this, in terms of I have this running note on my phone that says things I want to tell you, and it's from my son. If anything should ever happen to me, these are quotes that I've picked up. These are thoughts that I've, brought up myself or discovered. And I feel like we've lost the art of living beyond ourselves. When you look, especially when you go over to Europe and stuff, and you see these buildings, or you see the pyramids even, the architects never saw the finished product.
That's right.
And I think you mentioned the church is 2,000 years old. It didn't start with us, and it's not going to end with us. So it's that mentality, and not just even the leaders. It's supposed to be the church's mentality that this is not just about us. It's about how do we live walking on water, so that the church can benefit, the family of God can move forward. Yeah, so I just think that's an interesting thought, like of how like I need to live in mind way beyond my life. Like, and I think even what Pastor Kenny had a saying.
My dad used to. The people would. Someone asked him or said to him one time, "Kenny Foreman, I hope you live to see all your dreams fulfilled." And my dad said, "Well, I don't."
That's such a great response. Man.
And he would say to me, he said, "Never outlive your dreams.
Yep.
Have a dream that's big enough that it outlives you."
That's right.
And yeah.
That's so good.
And so,
speaking of your dad,
yeah.
I would like, have you thought of how, like, what would your dad have done in this season? Like, just maybe some of his.
I don't know. I mean, that's something I think.
Because and just of course everyone knows context, but like, for you, this size of church, for the legacy it's had, like you can't just think about one thing. You can't think about what's good for just the people inside. You got to think about your relationship with the city. You got to think about, there's so much more that you have on your perspective than like maybe we would have on ours, a different perspective. So like, I'm just curious, like, going through this, have you thought like, man, Dad, what would you do now? Like, what would you?
I think God took him to heaven so he wouldn't have to do this.
Well, I'll say, I'll say, Pastor Ken, that part of what drove your dad, that drives Cathedral, is seeing the needs no one else sees, hear the cries no one else hears, meeting the needs no one else is meeting, and that's exactly what you did during this time.
Sure,
that's what started his ministry. That's what characterized your ministry during this time. We stepped up, and $40 million worth of food later, here we are still serving. We stepped up and we're building a facility for people who are housing challenged. And, I think it's that very thing. What's nobody else seeing and doing? And I think that's where you stood out too during this time, is a lot of churches, as I said earlier, all they did was complain and point fingers and write horrible things about government leaders. And it's like, no. What you do is what you can do. And that's what you stood up and did. And I just really appreciate that leadership. Because when we're all going to go through a crisis in our lives. And the church went through a crisis last year.
Yeah.
And what you did was you teach us what to do in a crisis. Some pastors were saying, here's what to do in a crisis: blame people, complain, put it on somebody else, shift the blame. You didn't do any of that. You just stood up and you led us into caring for those who had needs. And that's what you do. You do what you can do. And I think that's exactly what your dad would have done. I think that DNA was so in you, it just happened naturally. Because you heard the cries and you saw the needs instead of just pointing fingers and blaming, which every other pastor I saw online was doing. And it's like what you basically taught your family then, your church family, is when you get into crisis, just point fingers and blame people. And it's like, no, that's not what you do. You do what you can do. And I just really appreciate your leadership during that time, bud.
Well, just think about the food, right? I mean, how many thousands of families were fed?
Right.
Hundreds of thousands.
I mean,
it's crazy.
That's radical to think about, It's profound, actually.
Over 600,000 individuals receive food through this facility, and the people of this church, and the generosity of God.
Which were experiencing crisis.
Yeah.
You see, where they weren't coming in line simply because there was free food. Yeah. They were coming in line because there was nothing to eat.
Yeah. I think Dad would have been, and I'm sure he was, if God gave him a glimpse, so proud of the way Cathedral stepped up. I mean, like Dr. Wayne said, God positioned Cathedral for that moment. And the courage, even. I mean, we were out there. I mean, we were still trying to practice safe habits. But there was still a lot of unknown and uncertainty at that time about the virus. Much more than, I mean, we knew much more. Well, we know much more now than we did back then. But the church rallied. We didn't run away from the pandemic. We ran toward the people who were suffering. And I think that's been the testimony of the church for 2,000 years. Again, we tend to think, well, this plague, it's like the baseball, this generation, is, well, we've seen the best player ever, right? Well, there was another player in another generation that, this hasn't been the only pandemic, that the church has had to face.
Sure.
I mean, but the way the church has rallied in other pandemics and the way Cathedral rallied, I was so proud of the way the church family, and I know Dad would have been so proud of the way the church family rallied to serve the community and to be bridge builders. My dad has always been a bridge builder. And I think that DNA in the church of building bridges to our community, of serving the community, building bridges to the city so we could team up with the city to serve the community. Yeah. So I think how we tried to model that, again, that was a horribly difficult year to navigate. Because things were changing all the time and it required extraordinary flexibility. And scaling up systems and, tweaking things as you went along. But I think God gave us the grace, to move into that and to again deepen each of us through it. Juan, I think I think I'm a more maybe weathered pastor, but I think I'm a better pastor.
That's good.
Coming through that.